What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Scale News Update. This is the show where we talk about the news topics that happened in the scale world of RC over the past week, or in this case, the last year. This is the final episode of the Scale News Update for 2021. And today, rather than go through my normal list of news items that popped up throughout the week, I want to talk about the entire year and the top news stories that I found from it. I went back and I reviewed every episode that I posted in 2021 and cherry picked the top 10 items that I wanted to discuss. Some good, some not so good. Let's jump into them. In chronological order, the first one is the release of the Axial Ryft. We discussed this in episode 137, and that was on January 12th, 2021. Up to that point, the Bomber was starting to be a bit of an aging platform, and the Wraith was still around as well, but it was even older. And that market you could kind of see just slowly going away in popularity. But then Axial comes back in with the release of the 2.2 rock bouncer that is the Ryft. Beefed up, huge power system RTR, something that Axial has never done in an 2.2 vehicle like this. It of course has had some durability issues with the way that people drive them. Maybe that's outside of the spec of how Axial expects the customers to drive the vehicles or their reasonable expectation of durability. Or maybe it's a little underbuilt. And depending on what side of the argument you're on, probably depends on how much you think that it should cost versus how much it does cost. On the positive side, the aftermarket has jumped on with support for that vehicle, and you can pretty much get just about anything for it. So, our first notable item for 2021. Number 2 on my list is actually 2 different releases from Proline. Both happened in February. First is the Cliffhanger. This was announced on episode 141 of the Scale News Update on February 9th. Now, it's just a Lexan body, but every once in a while, there's just these hit releases, very much like the Power Wagon was. The Power Wagon was actually the cover photo of the very first Scale News Update a long time back. And obviously, that body still popular today. Cliffhanger kind of feels like it's following in those footsteps. A great looking body, great clearances, super popular among the crowds that are looking for performance. I think that this is just one of those kind of landmark bodies that they made that we'll continue to see for years to come. The second one is almost the opposite of that, and that was the Ford Ranger body released on episode 143, also in February the 23rd. 2021 was just the Ford Ranger of years. Like, it obviously could be worse, but still. That Ford Ranger body did have Proline going into the realm of adding injection molded parts to their bodies, which was cool to see. But like we saw with a lot of things, the pricing on that body was reflective of the extra effort that was shown. And speaking of pricing, item number 3. This was episode 146, March 13th, and this is kind of a whole year's theme. Price increases. Price increases hit a lot of companies having to take and look at the entire product line and adjust prices accordingly. This is something that at the time that this happened, I discussed in the news saying, I don't think that this is going to be an isolated issue. At that time, Red Cat was the first one to announce that they were going to raise prices across their line by a certain margin. And we saw then other companies follow that throughout, as well as just new releases seeing much higher prices when they came out compared to maybe vehicles that were directly related to it that maybe didn't see that same price initially. So while price increases are not a good thing to see, they're definitely one of the most noteworthy news stories that we talked about this year. Item number 5 came in episode 155 on May 18th, and that was the release of the Traxxas 2021 Bronco. Now, this platform is starting to get a little bit older, around 4 years old or so, getting a little bit older than most of its competitors in the market, but it's still a feature-rich platform, and the new Bronco body looked fantastic. And on top of that, they incorporated a new clipless body system. It's just a really well-designed and extra convenient system that they put on there. We've since seen it incorporated into other Traxxas vehicles as well. So beyond just the looks of the body that they put on, the feature that they added there, and the solid base that sits underneath, Traxxas 2021 Ford Bronco was one of the most noteworthy stories of the year. Item number 5 on the list also from episode 155 from May 18th. And this was a release from Element with the new Ecto. The Ecto, very much like the Bronco, was just a rebody of an existing platform. And in this case, it was the configuration that the Gatekeeper had underneath of it. So they basically just put a new body on top of it. And initially, I think that this thing looked a little bit funny, and it took a while, but it grew on me over time. The release of the Ecto really looked like Element just kind of taking a look back and seeing what a lot of people were running and then just making their own version of that, just to kind of chase the popularity of, familiar setups you would see on the rocks. It's a very Power Wagon-esque looking body with a couple of scale bits to it. The release of this Element, almost the exact opposite of the 2021 Bronco. Not that old of a platform, but also not very feature rich. Basically one of the most stripped down newer vehicles that you can get at this point. No portal axles, no locking or unlocking, no 2-speed, anything like that. No inner fenders or interior, just a body on a simple chassis with simple axles. Not a lot of frills. It occupies a completely different space in the market compared to some of these other vehicles. As we go into 2022, it'll be interesting to see if they stay with that same style of business model or if they try and add some features to make it a more apples to apples comparison with a lot of the other trucks on the market. Story number 6 jumps all the way to 165, and this was at the end of July, the 27th. And this was the release of the Axial early Bronco on the SCX3 chassis. When the original Axial SCX-10-3 came out, they chased a lot of the features that had started to become very popular in the market, specifically with Traxxas. And they added a 2-speed, and then instead of adding locking and unlocking differentials, they went with a dig unit instead. Also, portal axles, a huge change from Axial's model up until that point, but there's still a number of people in scale trail trucking or crawling that would prefer the look of the straight axle versus the arguable performance benefit that you would get with the portal axle. So Axial tried to appease that crowd by giving us this Axial SCX-10-3 early Bronco. But what followed the release was what made it more interesting, and that is the sails or the appearance of sails. You don't see this truck out there nearly as much as the other Axials. Mostly Jeeps. Now, is that because the majority of people actually prefer Jeeps? Probably a little bit. Is it partially also because the market is more leaning towards portal axles than straight axles? Probably partially a little bit as well. And the only way we'll really be able to figure out which way is the biggest factor is if they decide to release another body style on top of the straight axle platform, which I hope they do. And I personally hope it's a Jeep. Story number 7 comes from episode 167, just a couple of weeks later, and this was on August 10th. And this was the release of the Element Knightrunner. And this was interesting for a number of reasons. One, the Knightrunner, as the name would possibly imply, was a collaboration with Knight Customs. And he helped with the body and then had a lot of accessories basically ready to go on the day of the release for this truck. And he did a great job. The styling looks dead on to the truck that it is most definitely almost an exact copy of, but unlicensed still. But the style, overall, fantastic. Element is also the only platform right now that is available with an independent front suspension under a scale truck like this. So they had the ability to release a truck with a realistic style suspension setup front and rear. To get the proportions of this truck to be as close to reasonable as possible, they did go with their longer 12.8-inch wheelbase, and they went with their tiny tires to fit on there. I think these tires are less than 4 inches tall. So that combined with the very low clearance of the Element IFS makes this truck a not performer. Doesn't do very well off-road. Being around them, driving them a few times, you have to really appreciate the scale style to really enjoy this truck. That is where this is most definitely focused to really grasp the audience that this truck is for. But if you're going after that scale style, there's a lot of things you can do to completely make it your own. And for that, the whole package that they put together, I thought that this was one of the most noteworthy stories. Episode 177, October 19th, dropped a bomb on the market, and that was the release of the Axial SCX6. This thing came out of nowhere for most people, like just absolutely completely unexpected. And when it dropped, it shocked people with everything from its size, its weight, and its cost. This was the most expensive vehicle Axial has ever released. I think that it is definitely the coolest vehicle that they've probably also released. Having this truck, driving it, the experience is completely different than a 1/10 scale. It is a separate type of driving. You feel the weight. It takes a lot of power. You don't want to carry it back to your truck. Just everything about this really changes the experience of going out with an RC. Now, if I could only have one RC, would it be this? No. But if you have the means to add this to your stable as a second, third, or 10th or whatever RC, man, is it worth it. So much fun. It absolutely puts a smile on your face, and it's something that you have to experience to fully understand. But once you do, you'll get it. And then just one episode later on 178, October 26th, the one episode this year that I was unable to host was the release of the Vanquish VS410 Phoenix Portal. The only time that I wasn't able to do the news myself. Matt from Scale Builders Guild jumped in and edited the news for me that week, and he got to talk about this release, which of course is my favorite release of the year. It is the first release from Vanquish Products with plastic molded axles, trying to get down to a price point that is just more comfortable for the market with the features that it includes. The single biggest item of the release of that vehicle was the VFD twin transmission, and that has a selectable dig in it as well as selectable overdrive, allowing you to go from a more standard 6.5% overdrive to a very aggressive 33% overdrive, allowing you the comp style ability of a high overdrive setting while not having to run in it all the time, being able to put it into a almost unnoticeable 6.5% for normal driving situations. The VFD Twin still features the super low and forward motor position, keeping the center of gravity as low as possible for the vehicle. And then the new F10 molded axles that fit underneath of that chassis are again an evolution of the Vanquish axles. Tight tolerances with the molded parts to keep clearances as good as possible, yet beefed up to make sure that they're extremely stout. Also featuring a tight turning radius with 51 degrees of steering angle. This was a big release for Vanquish products, and it sold out much faster than anticipated, with the second release of them basically going to happen at the beginning of 2022. This is a truck that I truly enjoy and something that I've been part of the team working towards the release of it for a considerable amount of time. Regardless of my obvious biases though, I think that this is a clear candidate to be put on the most noteworthy stories of 2021. Number 10 was from episode 182, and that was on October 23rd. And this one probably surprises a number of people, but I feel that it's the Axial four-wheel steer Capra. It seems like a basic little change, just add something to the already existing Capra platform. It was almost a complete retooling of that Capra cage just to make this model happen. On top of that, adding a four-wheel steer option is something that we don't really see from a mass market vehicle. But this is a truck that's attempting to take four-wheel steer and put it in front of the masses and hopefully see if they grasp onto it. Coincidentally, I had been looking to build a four-wheel steer vehicle as of late, since that release wasn't that long ago, and this just kind of fell at the perfect time. I took mine and I had an absolute blast with it. I didn't love the initial Capra release. I thought I would have back then, and I just didn't fall in love with it. But they made this four-wheel steer version, and all of a sudden, that all changed. I enjoyed driving it. The stock electronics did pretty well, even with the lack of gearing that the Capra has. But the stock radio and the programming with the independent four-wheel steer control that they added was pretty perfect and did really well. So I was happy with driving a Capra again. So happy that I decided to do a bunch of work to it to make it even more what I was after. But the base vehicle, and the reason that I upgraded it, is because I really enjoyed it. And I thought that it was a a good call and something I was happy to see Axial throw out there. They had 4 items on a top 10 list for the year. I'm a big fan of Axial, but I also think that they made some pretty bold choices for the year. And I think that all of them were warranted to be on there. And I'm also going to throw on one extra item, and that is because it was released today. And I don't really know how this is going to go yet, but I think that maybe that is why it deserves a place on this more than anything. Episode 187, today, when you're watching this, the RC 4-wheel drive Trailfinder 3. Now, the Trailfinder 2 has been out for a really long time. It's seen some little updates and changes over time to a few little, drivetrain components and things like that, but hasn't changed that much. Now they released the new Trailfinder 3, and it has some fairly decent changes that sit underneath of a familiar looking Toyota body, or Mojave, specifically the Mojave 2. Underneath of that body though, we now see a stamped C-channel chassis compared to the machined aluminum chassis that they had been running for a really long time up to this point. So stepping up to something that's a little bit more scale. And then they also added a molded transmission transfer case and motor-shaped motor cover. It's a 22R, I think they're calling it. Obviously trying to make it look like the Toyota motor that would have resided in this truck. Of course, there's RC 4-wheel drive things about it. It's got the nice motor cover and all that. The hood doesn't open, so you can't necessarily see it. But if you have the body off, it looks like there's a motor in there. The price on this vehicle also high. It's like $650 for an RTR, but it's got the same axles underneath of it. It's got 155s on it, which I think scale out to be a pretty tiny wheel when that body is definitely not 1/10 scale. So, it's got RC 4-wheel drive decisions on, that doesn't surprise anybody. But it'll be interesting to see if the popularity of the new TF3 will follow the long-running success that was the Trailfinder 2. At this point, I've only seen the initial press releases from the RC 4-wheel drive, and that's why I'm putting this on there as a tentative place mark. Yet to be determined. But those were my top 11 items for the year. 2021 has been a great year with an asterisk. I got to go to a lot of great events. King of the Streets, Scale Nationals, Axial Fest, the Crawl Spaces, Rocas Rojo out in Colorado, Proline by the Fire. I had some absolutely great times, had some fun trucks. There was weirdness still. Not as bad as the year before, but it was progress at least. But we have our toy trucks to escape those real world issues and have some fun with. This year, we also kept the live streams going. Matt and I have our live stream takeover that we do every Wednesday, and it happened every Wednesday, all of 2021. Whether one of us was gone or not, there was a live show every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, or 9 p.m. Eastern, or wherever you happen to be. Maybe you're watching it after the fact, but it happened every week, which is a nice streak to keep going. We've been doing that show for almost 100 weeks at this point. Decent amount of time. Never missed a Wednesday. And then of course I have my Friday night streams, which I did miss a handful of. And I'm gonna miss this week because it's New Year's and I'm gonna take it off. With that being the end of what is undoubtedly a very long episode of the Scale News Update, I just wanna say thank you to everybody who watched these videos every Tuesday or however many of them you caught. I appreciate it. Wouldn't do it if so many of you didn't watch, because it is a lot of work. Every Monday night is a late night for me. But I appreciate all of the feedback that you guys always get. And if you have some for this week, your favorite story, what you think I missed, what you think I got wrong, what didn't deserve, what did deserve, throw it below. Spirited debate in the YouTube comments is what I'm convinced makes the whole algorithm run. I hope your 2021 was as good as you could make it. 2022, I hope for better for all of us. With that, thanks again for watching. We'll see you in 2022.